And now I want to bring up James Moore, who is with Urban Land Institute. He says over 25 years of experience in architecture, community planning, urban design, and development consulting. He's a principal in Advanced Planning Group with Jacobs, a global architecture, engineering, and consulting company. Dr. Moore has particular expertise in organizing and managing complex urban redevelopment projects. He received his Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania, holds degrees from MIT, including an MS in real estate development. Moore is active locally and nationally in AIA, APA, CNU, and ULI. A 20-year member of the Urban Land Institute, he's the past chair of ULI Tampa Bay and the current chair of ULI's Urban Revitalization Council. And James was involved in the very development of Pinellas by Design and the initial rollout presentations. So we're brought him back again to give us an update. Thank you, James.
Okay, I can see the, oh, there we go. I can see the image, but I can't see it out there. Thank you all for having me. As Mike said, I was involved over the last 10 years, or 10 years ago, with Pinellas by Design. I would argue that of the 67 counties in the state, probably Pinellas is the most interesting, and I think potentially has the most opportunity. And I'm not saying that. I live in Tampa. I mean, obviously it's the Tampa Bay area, but I think there's some really unique attributes here that can totally change over really how things happen over the next 10 to 15 years. I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities and to put that into a larger context. And so I'm going to talk about what other communities in the country are doing, what are some of the successes and what are some of the challenges that folks are dealing with. And I recognize that we're a little bit behind schedule, so I'll try to bump things up just a bit. Just some data. You've heard a lot of data in the last 15, 20 minutes just about where we are. 274 square miles, it's a small county. There are several cities in the country that are larger than that. As has been pointed out, population is about 930,000. So that gives you a density of about 3,390 people per square mile. If you go and look at some of these other cities, they tend to be denser than Pinellas is. So Pinellas, the perception often is that Pinellas is a fairly densely built out county, but in comparison to comparable cities around the country, Portland, Seattle, Denver, et cetera, the density is actually a little bit lower. The fourth bullet point, that the county is built out, but it is neither particularly dense nor particularly urban, I think that's the challenge. The goal is not necessarily to densify the entire county, it's to find key locations within the county where a lot of new redevelopment can occur. A lot of the county can stay effectively the way it is, but these key areas have to be picked up, and I think the Pinellas by Design, as Michael Crawford has presented, is the start, is a framework for how to do that. I was involved in Pinellas by Design. It's actually, I think, a model project because it was one of the very first that took a regional view, very much data-driven. There was a lot of GIS information. 18 or 19 separate layers were brought together, a lot of public involvement, so you're bringing quantitative and qualitative data. Out of that came sort of a framework for how to move forward, and then ultimately sort of here's where things should go. So it was a very analytical process, and that's just the beginning. I know we have a speaker here later from Esri, sort of the GIS leaders in the world. That is the way planning is occurring now, is the way planning is occurring going forward. So Pinellas was actually, I think, at the vanguard in terms of doing that. So the plan itself, I think, is still very good. It's very valid, it's very strong. The challenge, obviously, has been mentioned, is how do you implement what took place? One of the key things to remember is that Pinellas County is not a monolith. It is actually fairly diverse in terms of the development patterns within the county. This was picked up in the Pinellas by Design document. You have those areas that were actually built before the Second World War, and if we think about some of the neighborhoods near and around downtown St. Petersburg, they have a particular character. Then a lot of development took place right after the Second World War. So you think of the neighborhoods not too far from where we are, parts of Clearwater, Largo, Seminole, et cetera, et cetera. And it's important to remember that if a residential neighborhood was built in 1954, it's 60 years old now. And the lifespan of many of those buildings was projected to be somewhere between 50 and 70 years. So there are large segments of the county that are ripe for redevelopment just naturally. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then obviously you have sort of the later 20th century development up in the East Lake area, very different pattern. And the fact is, not all of these three different types of development are in the same position with respect to how they will redevelop. So it's important that we not think that the entire county is going to redevelop. It's important to remember there are key locations within the county where the biggest opportunities are. And that's the challenge going forward, is not just to identify those locations, but to protect them, as has been mentioned, so it doesn't turn into, say, residential development, which is fine, but does not help the tax base, or to help aggregate them such that private sector can come in and do its job. Here you see simply some of the aerials, and you can look at it, and you see that that is a fairly built-out landscape, but it's not very dense. I mean, you see a lot of trees, you see a few rooftops here and there. So the question is, where in that do you start to insert this new type of development, this new opportunities? You see some of the industrial area close to downtown St. Petersburg, some of the industrial area that was mentioned earlier, not very high value, but how do you go about redeveloping it? And then some of the newer, and what you see really is an auto-oriented, I'll call it a suburban form of development. Some of that will stay, but some of that you're going to have to find the opportunities to add some density, add some intensity, and to make that happen. Now, it's important to think about the scales at which people actually live. Most people relate at a neighborhood scale. Whether it's the place where they live, they walk the dog, they take the kids to school, they go get a cup of milk, they get a cup of coffee. It's very bounded, it's often pedestrian scaled, and I would argue that in this country we're getting pretty good at designing good neighborhoods. I mean, we have a sense of how to design them, how they integrate, how they mix. But then the second scale, as has been mentioned, is the regional scale. And we do not have a handle on how to deal with regional scale planning in this country. I mean, part of it is simply that, as was mentioned, it crosses multiple counties, so there's multiple jurisdictions, there's a lot of factions that differ and disagree. But the reality is our economies in this country are all regional. We are part of the Tampa Bay metro area. But realistically, you might live in a small community where you can control 10,000 people out of the 3 million here. So there's a disconnect between how we actually live at the regional scale and how we think about and plan and govern at the regional scale. And then increasingly, we live at the global scale. I mean, in many ways that we all know, the Pinellas beaches are world-renowned. People come here because they've read about it, they've heard about it, they've seen it. We all work in businesses where we can communicate across the globe 24/7. So it's an interesting way of thinking because it tends to not be the way we've traditionally thought about how to plan our communities. So you have sort of a small, medium, and large sort of scale, and that's just a fact. And all the communities, certainly in this country, all the regions in this country are dealing with that as they go forward. It's also popular to say, well, there's a triple bottom line. There's the social environment, the economic environment, and then the natural environment. But the reality is Pinellas County is built out, okay? It is a man-made artifact. And what we live in is a built environment that we've created. It has its own sort of natural operational attributes, and it exists within a political environment. And I would say that despite, I think, the very positive aspects of what happened with the planning of Pinellas by design, the implementation is essentially a political problem. It's not a technical problem. And that's the challenge. We know there's multiple municipalities within the county. The county, as a county, only controls a certain portion of the county. So there's a political problem that has to be addressed regardless of the technical answers that are out there. And this is a challenge that every community in this country is dealing with. You know, it's not simply, I tend to be on the technical side, what can be done, but in the trenches at the local level, it's politics. How do we make our communities as good as they can be? So it's always that little bit of a disconnect. And obviously a lot of things are changing. You know, these are in the 10 years since we talk about Pinellas by design, there's been technological transformations. Just the nature of data and the data that are accessible to communities has just boomed off the charts. Again, I hope my colleague from Esri will speak to that. You know, you talk about the smarter city. Globally, in Southeast Asia and the Middle East, the smart city, the interconnected, the analytical, data-driven city is what everyone's talking about. I think there's a lot of benefit there, but how do you apply that to an existing environment? Technological transformations, what would be the impact of autonomous vehicles if they actually become a reality? It's speculation at this point, but you think 10, 15 years down the road, it could be real, and there are ways to build on that. So there's a lot of technological changes in the nature of cities and communities that we're all sort of struggling with. How do you integrate them into the planning process? Economic transformations. Increasingly, people can live anywhere, work whenever they feel like it, stay interconnected. Well, that will impact their choice of how they want to live, how they want to work, how they want to conduct their lives. Are we building on that, et cetera? Are we taking that into consideration? I saw some of the data that were presented about computer software programmers, et cetera, increasing and moving in. Well, that is an audience that a lot of cities around the country are trying to attract. And the way they're attracting it is by saying, we're a cool place to be, come and work here. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then obviously there's demographic transformations. ULI came out earlier last week with their sort of program for what's happening in 2015, and they pointed out that a lot of the things that attract baby boomers also attract millennials, and that if you take those two generations combined, it's almost 50% of the United States population. And we have a lot of boomers here, not so many millennials, and so there's an opportunity there. What are the things that attract them? The whole nature, get married, have kids, move to the suburbs, some of that is the same, some of that is very different. Get rid of the kids, move out of the suburbs, back to the city, you're seeing that. So the demographics are very, very important in terms of both what is happening in the county, as you've seen, but also what could happen going forward. The other thing, getting back to the 3 levels of development, there's sort of 3 types of redevelopment as well. There's plain old one-for-one replacement. You have an old 1950s ranch house, you tear it down, you build a nice modern 2014 house. I see a lot of that happening in places like Tampa, where I live, and over a 10-year period, the property values go up and the population goes down. Because that ranch house might have had 3 or 4 kids when it was first built, and now it might have a couple whose kids are all left. So literally, you're replacing, physically you're growing, but population-wise you're decreasing. Interesting phenomenon. So one-for-one is important, you want that to happen, but that's not going to address the issue here that Pinellas is looking at. Then you have redevelopment and replacement within the limits of existing plans, and by those plans I don't mean Pinellas by design. I mean just your general comprehensive plan. We see a little bit of growth here, we see some opportunity there, and occasionally you'll see a scenario where someone will tear down an old 1950s apartment building and put up some new townhouses. So maybe you get a little bit of increase in population, you get a little bit of increase in intensity, buildings look nicer, property values go up, but again, it's not taking on the challenge of how do you add those new jobs, how do you add those new population. And then there is the strategic, focused increase in intensity and density, and that's what Pinellas by Design is trying. And the example here, many of you have heard about it, it's the Pearl District in Portland. In the mid-1990s, even before they built their streetcar system, they took this old industrial area, they rezoned it, they redesigned it, they added 22 blocks of essentially downtown. It's at the edge of the downtown. You can see the purple line representing the light rail system. And if you've been to Portland recently, it is one of the most vibrant urban neighborhoods in the country. And if you look at the scale of the buildings, they're not 40-story buildings, but they're all in the 5, 6, 8 to 10-story range. They're probably 3, 4 FAR. That's a lot of development in a very compact area. And those are the types of examples that you want to look at, because you don't have thousands of acres to redevelop. You have very compact, focused areas where that redevelopment can take place. So this is both the challenge and the opportunity for Pinellas. And some of the design strategies, I'll move through these quickly because I'm sure many of us are aware of them, but they're all part and parcel. Mixing uses. I mean, that's the way it is. The sort of 24-hour live, work, play lifestyle, things have to be close to one another. And a lot of communities, not like I can't speak to the communities here in Pinellas, but a lot of communities still have a tendency to not particularly like mixed-use development. And the reality is this is how we live. We want convenience, we want things to be close together. It's a design problem. We don't want the noise, we don't necessarily want the smell of the restaurant, but we want to know it's a block away. So how do we put those together? Diverse residential options. People will live almost anywhere, and what you're increasingly seeing as you look around is a wide variety of residential. The picture in the upper right-hand corner, which shows towers in the background, is actually in Vancouver. I didn't mean to show the towers. What's in the foreground are houseboats. People live on the water. They live in boats. If you've been to London, there's a large houseboat community. I'm not recommending Pinellas has a lot of waterfront, but I'm just saying that the range of places and the range of ways people will live is quite extensive. So really think through how you can take advantage of that. Walkable and bikeable. We've all heard it. We all heard the statistics, the negative statistics. Actually, the most bike accidents went up for the first time last year in about 10 or 12 years, and #1 state for bicycle accidents in the country, Florida. Okay, that is not a statistic we should be proud of, and it's also a statistic that is pushing in the wrong direction. Because people today, particularly young people, want to be able to walk, they want to be able to bike, and you want to be able to do it safely. Now again, county-wide, I don't think you can make the entire county walkable and bikeable, but you can make key areas of the county walkable and bikeable. So that has to be a very, very important priority. Chris Lineberger, involved with ULI up out of DC, has done what he calls walk-ups, walkable urban places. He's evaluated the top 30 metro areas in terms of where they exist, where the opportunities exist. He was in Orlando over the summer, spoke to us about it, and these are the top 30 metro areas in the country, and Tampa is number 28th. Tampa, by the way, is the Tampa Bay area, okay? So it includes, so he picked up on a couple, I think he said there were 2 in Pinellas County. That's not such a good statistic. You look at it, you say of 30, we're number 28. But going forward, he says that we have the opportunity to be the 11th highest in terms of building new walkable places. So we may be trailing a little bit, but the capacity, the opportunity to create these sort of compact, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods is very high here. And he is actually very bullish on our ability to go ahead and do that. So it's a great, I don't have the website address for it, but if you look up Lineberger walk-ups or walkable urban places, it's a fascinating document, a lot of good reading and data there. Multiple attractions. This is absolutely one of the strengths of the Pinellas area. In part because if you look at the images there, and you can see on the bottom you've got downtown St. Pete, and you've got the tall buildings and the walkable places and a lot of density and intensity, and then you look on the top and you see this incredible natural setting that we're in. You know, this 22 miles of unbelievably gorgeous beaches, and the fact that you can have those within a few miles of each other, very few places in the country can take advantage of that. So this notion of multiple attractions, things that will draw people, you know, literally A to Z, soup to nuts. It's a huge advantage, and one that we have to figure out how to build on and take additional advantage of. What are all these communities trying to attract? They're trying to attract anchor institutions, okay? Now, in the case of, and again, I apologize, these are downtown St. Petersburg. You can do additional information. You have the university down there. You have the health institutions down there. We already heard how many people they employ. You have things like NOAA. You have anchor institutions that can attract higher paying jobs, better educated people, and begin to create little ecosystems of themselves. On the right, I have 2 examples. The lower right-hand corner is Amazon's proposed headquarters in Seattle, thinking of that as an anchor institution. And then the upper right is the Status Center at MIT, a research think tank set up to attract world-class scientists, et cetera, et cetera. So part of the challenge is where are the existing anchor institutions around which you can build, and what are some of the ones you might attract to come here and to start to create? Because sort of the big issue in a lot of these areas is what they call innovation districts, which is essentially redevelopment on steroids around sort of STEM, around very high-paying academic or very high-paying intellectually oriented jobs. The examples you can see here, St. Louis, Detroit. These are communities that are not growing at all, but they're still creating these innovation districts, and they're attracting these high-paying jobs to come and to help stimulate growth, if not in the entire area, within key parts of the area. 2 additional examples, Boston, we all know, a lot of academic up there, but then Seattle, South Lake Union, which I think I've mentioned before. You see the example here, based around the University of Washington, based around high-tech research and development, based around Amazon, and 80 acres on the edge of Lake Union has been completely redeveloped, thousands of jobs, thousands of people living there, totally changing the dynamic of that particular segment of Seattle. Very, very compact, very focused, not a lot of acreage, huge impact. And that's sort of one of the examples that we need to think about. Transit. If you want to do urban density well, you need to have a transit system involved. It's just almost impossible to do good, effective density if everybody has to drive. You have an opportunity here next week to begin to think about it. The example you see here is Denver, if you have a chance to go out there. Denver is doing a phenomenal job of integrating transit into its regional planning. Portland, we've all heard about the transit there. This is Arlington, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., and I show it because the issue with transit is it's very much in keeping with the general strategy. You're not doing everything everywhere. You're being unbelievably focused in where you put the development. And you can see the little bullseyes there. Those are the transit stations. And if you look at this photograph of Arlington, 80+% of the land value in Arlington is on 11% of the land area. And those areas that are close to the stations see a lot of intensity and density of redevelopment, but half a mile away, single-family neighborhoods stay intact. So you literally can get the best of both worlds. You get the full diversity of development types by using the transit system both as a mobility system, but also as a way to focus desired redevelopment. That's the opportunity that Pinellas is looking at right now. Parking, you saw the photographs. This is a surface-parked community. We have to move away from that. We have to start thinking about being much more efficient with parking. And that involves district approaches, it involves structures, it involves multi-use. And again, not everywhere, but in those key locations. Public spaces, people will willingly put up with intensity and density if they get some interesting public spaces to be involved. I apologize, this is a little over the top. This is Times Square as it exists now. They took the cars out. Everyone said chaos would occur. It did not. And Times Square, the street, which they simply repainted, has become one of the great places in New York to go hang out, 24 hours a day. So, you know, think big, do simple things, and sometimes great opportunities emerge. Amazing, you have to focus on design. People will live in fairly dense or intense environments if they're well designed. Every step, every sidewalk piece, everything you do has to be thought through as an integrated whole. And that's what these redeveloped areas, they're seeing very high quality, both architectural design, engineering design, urban design, landscape. They're really well thought out. Doesn't have to be everywhere, but you have to really, the design has to be done quite well. And then it's not just a hardware problem, it's a software problem. How do you program things so that they work? How do you bring in events? How do you keep things active? How do you make things vital? All over the country, you see the kinds of places that are attracting the types of folks that you'd like to get here, and there's a program, there's a software aspect to it. It doesn't just happen on its own. It becomes a very important part of the overall puzzle. And then ultimately, it's about the sense of place. I show you Bryant Park in New York. I grew up not that far from there. Totally revitalized in the last 30 years to become a wonderful place, another place in New York. We have, obviously, the great natural setting. And that, I'm not sure how we improve on that, but then the built setting has to be equally desirable and equally attractive. And again, that gets back to the issue of design. Pinellas County, I think a huge opportunity. I show this photo because in some ways, it is a peninsula, it's almost an island. It's isolated from its context, which is a bit of a detriment, but also a bit of an opportunity. The challenge is to really look inside and say, where are those key places where we can do some of this great, new, well-designed, well-thought-out, very focused redevelopment, building on what we have all around us, which is this incredible natural setting, but then matching it with an incredible urban setting. Not everywhere, but in those key locations where it can do the most benefit for the county. That's, I think, the goal of Pinellas by Design. That's where it's been pushing for the last 10 years. That's what we hope to talk about for the rest of the 2 days that we're together. Thank you very much, and I think we have a chance now to take a little bit of a break.